Once in a country, there were 7 daughters of poor parents who used to play every day under the shady trees in the king's garden, along with the gardener's daughter. The gardener's daughter would often tell her playmates about the beautiful son he would have when she got married. She described him as a boy with a moon on his forehead and a star on his chin. However, her friends would laugh and tease her. One day, the king overheard the gardener's daughter talking about the wonderful son she would have, and he became intrigued. He had 4 queens but no children, so he thought that it would be amazing to have such a son. The king approached the gardener and expressed his desire to marry his daughter. This made the gardener and his wife ecstatic because they thought it would be a great honor for their daughter to become a princess. They happily agreed to the king's proposal and organized a grand wedding, inviting all their friends. The king generously provided the gardener with all the money he needed for the wedding festivities. A year passed, and the day neared when the gardener's daughter was expected to give birth to her son. The king's 4 other queens frequently visited her, and one day they asked her, "What would you do if you feel ill while the king was out for hunting and couldn't be informed of your condition?" Concerned about the possibility, she approached the king when he returned from his hunting trip and asked him how she could reach him if she ever needed him urgently. The king handed her a kettle drum and instructed her to beat it whenever she wanted him. He assured her that no matter how far away he might be, he would hear the sound and come to her immediately. The following morning, with the king away on his hunt, the 4 queens visited the gardener's daughter again. Curious about the king's promise, they urged her to beat the kettle drum just to test if he would actually come. Initially reluctant, she eventually gave in to their persistent request and struck the drum. To her surprise, the king appeared before her. "Why did you call me?" he asked. "I have left my huntings to come to you." She replied, "I don't need anything. I just wanted to see if you would come when I beat the drum." The king said, "All right. But please don't call me again unless you truly need me." And he returned to his hunting. The next day, when the king left for his hunt as usual, the 4 queens once again visited the gardener's daughter. They pleaded with her to beat the drum again, just to see if the king would come. Initially hesitant, she eventually agreed. She beat the drum, and once again the king appeared before her. But this time he was angry because he realized she had called him without a genuine need. "Twice I have left my hunting and lost my game to come to you when you didn't need me," the king said angrily. "Now you may call me as much as you like, but I will not come to you." He stormed away in frustration. On third day, the gardener's daughter fell ill and desperately beat the kettle drum, hoping the king would come to her aid. The king did hear the sound, but he assumed she was just testing him again and ignored it. Meanwhile, the 4 queens returned and suggested blinding the gardener's daughter's eyes with a handkerchief, as was customary before a child's birth. They convinced her to agree and they proceeded to blindfold her. Soon after, the gardener's daughter gave birth to a beautiful baby boy with a moon on his forehead and a star on his chin. However, before the poor mother could see her newborn, the 4 wicked queens took the baby to the nurse. They instructed the nurse to keep the child silent, so his mother wouldn't hear him. They also ordered the nurse to either kill the baby during the night or secretly take him away, ensuring that the mother never laid eyes on him. In exchange of her complaints, the queens promised the nurse a large sum of money. Feeling torn between the fear and greed, the nurse reluctantly took the helpless infant and placed him inside a box. She was unsure of what to do, but felt compelled to follow the queen's orders. Meanwhile, the 4 queens left, satisfied with their wicked plan, and returned to the gardener's daughter. Once the baby boy was placed in the box, the wicked queens decided to play a cruel trick on the gardener's daughter. They removed the blindfold from her eyes and presented her with the box, claiming that it contained her son. However, when she opened it, she was devastated to find only a stone inside. She cried bitterly, realizing that her child had been taken away, but she was powerless to do anything about it. When the king returned home and learned about the deception, he became furious. He was enraged that his youngest wife, the gardener's daughter, had seemingly betrayed him by giving him a stone instead of the promised beautiful son. As a punishment, he reduced her status to that of a palace servant and refused to speak to her. In the middle of the night, the nurse, under the instruction of the wicked queens, took the box containing the baby boy and went to the vast jungle plain. There she dug a hole and securely placed the box inside. Even though the child was still alive, unbeknownst to them, the king's dog named Shankar had followed the nurse to observe her actions. As soon as she left and returned to the queens, who rewarded her with a large sum of money, Shankar approached the hole, retrieved the box, and opened it. Upon seeing the beautiful baby boy, Shankar was delighted. Instead of harming him, the dog decided to swallow the child whole and hide him inside his stomach. 6 months passed, and the dog Shankar wondered if the boy was still alive. In the darkness of the night, he brought the child up from his stomach and rejoiced in his beauty. The boy had now reached the age of 6 months. Shankar showed him with affection and love before swallowing him once again, keeping him safe for another 6 months. After this time had passed, Shankar ventured to the jungle plain once more. He brought the child out of his stomach again, now a year old, and lavished him with care and adoration, finding immense joy in his remarkable beauty. However, the dog's keeper had been observing Shankar's actions all along. He witnessed the incredible sight of a child emerging from the dog's stomach and rushed to inform the wicked queens. He described the child's extraordinary features, a moon on his forehead and a star on his chin, declaring that such a remarkable child had never been seen before. Filled with fear, the queens shared the news with the king as soon as he returned from the hunting. The queens made up a fake story about the dog causing trouble in their rooms. They lied and said that the dog was danger to their lives. They did this to manipulate the situation and make the king believe that the dog needed to be killed. The king believed what the queens told him and agreed to have the dog killed the next day. He didn't know what the special secret that the dog was keeping hidden. The king decided to have the dog shot down, not knowing about the child hidden inside the dog. The dog overheard the king's plan and became worried about the child's fate. He wanted to save the child. So he approached the king's cow named Suri and asked her to take care of the something important. The dog took the cow to a wide plain where he brought up the boy and showed him to Suri. The cow was amazed by the child's beauty. With a moon on his forehead and a star on his chin, Suri promised to take good care of the child and swallowed him to protect him. The next morning, the dog was taken to the jungle and shot as planned. Meanwhile, the child lived inside the cow's stomach for a year until he turned 2. Then the cow went to the plain to check on the child, brought him up, and played with him. Afterward, she swallowed him again. This happened again when the child turned 3, with the cow bringing him up, spending time with him, and swallowing him once more. However, a cowherd had witnessed the cow's actions and was amazed by the child's unique appearance. He ran to inform the 4 queens about the extraordinary child hidden inside the king's cow. The queens were terrified and distressed upon hearing this news. When the king returned home, they told him that the cow had attacked them, tearing their clothes and hair. The king decided to have cow killed the next morning. Suri, the cow, overheard the king's order and wondered how she could save the child. At midnight, she went to the king's untamable horse named Katar, who nobody could ride. Suri explained the situation and showed the child to Katar. The horse was delighted and promised to take care of the child. He even allowed the child to ride him, which no one had ever done before. After swallowing the boy, the cow made salams and accepted her fate. The next morning, the cow was taken to the jungle and killed. After spending a year inside the horse's stomach, the beautiful boy continued to live there. The horse would bring him up from its stomach and show him love and care. The little prince enjoyed playing in the stable, which was the only place the horse could go. Katar, the horse, was thrilled to see the child, who had now reached the age of 4. They spent time together, playing and bonding. However, after some time, the horse would swallow the child once again, keeping him safe inside its stomach. This pattern continued when the child turned 5 years old. The horse would bring him up, allowing him to experience love and affection, and they would engage in playtime in the stable. The child enjoyed this time with the horse. However, eventually the horse would swallow the child again to protect him. The groom saw everything that happened. The next morning, when the king went hunting, the groom told the four mean queens about the amazing child living inside the king's horse named Qatar. The queens cried, tore their hair and clothes, and refused to eat when they heard the groom's story. When the king came back in the evening and asked why they were so sad, they lied and said that the horse Qatar had rained their things and chased them away. The king wanted to make the queens feel better, so he told them to eat and not worry. He decided that he would have Qatar shot the next day, but the king realized that it would be difficult for just two men to kill such a dangerous horse. So he ordered his servants to gather a group of soldiers called sepoys to shoot the horse. The next day, the king stood with the soldiers around the stable, warning that he would personally shoot anyone who let the horse escape. But Khatar, the horse, overheard the king's orders. He brought the child and told him to go into a small room connected to the stable. In that room, the child found special things like a saddle, bridle, beautiful clothes, a sword, and a gun. The child dressed up like a prince, put the saddle and bridle on Khatar, and got on the horseback. Khatar was a magical horse from the land of fairies, so he could get anything he wanted. Ready to go, Khatar burst out the stable with the prince on his back, quickly passing the king before he could shoot, then ran away to a big plain in the jungle, and the soldiers tried to shoot them but couldn't catch up. The king saw the boy riding on the horse but couldn't see him clearly. The soldiers couldn't catch them, so they went to home. The king couldn't punish the soldiers because he himself had let the horse escape. Khatar and the prince kept going, riding all day and finding a tree to sleep under at night. The horse ate grass and the prince ate wild fruits from the jungle. The next morning, they continued their journey, going far until they reached a jungle in another country, not belonging to the prince's father but to a different king. The boy felt sad because he didn't know what to do all alone in the new country. But Qadar, his horse, reassured him that he would find a job and promised to help whenever needed. Before the boy left, Qadar told him to twist his right ear, and instantly the horse turned into a donkey. Then the Qadar insisted the boy to twist his own right ear, and he transformed into a poor-looking, ugly man with the special symbols hidden. The boy ventured further into the country until he reached a grain merchant house. He asked the merchant for a job, and the merchant agreed to hire him as a servant. The grain merchant lived near the king's palace. One night at midnight, the boy felt hot, so he went to the king's cool garden and started singing a beautiful song. The youngest princess of the king heard his enchanting voice and became curious about who would sing so wonderfully. And she came down to where the seemingly poor man was singing, asking him who he was and where he came from. But the boy didn't answer, remaining silent. The princess left, puzzled. The same thing happened on the second and third nights. On the third night, the princess couldn't understand why the man wouldn't respond to her questions. Frustrated, she remarked on his strangeness and left again. The next day, after finishing his work, the young prince went to see his horse in the jungle. The horse asked if he was well and happy, to which the boy replied positively, sharing that he was now a servant to a grain merchant. He recounted how he had sung in the king's garden for the past 3 nights, and each time the youngest princess had approached him asking about his identity. The boy wondered what he should do next. The horse advised him to tell the princess that he was a very poor man who had come from his own country to find work in this land. That night, the boy returned to the king's garden and sang a sweet song once more. The youngest princess heard him, got up dressed and came to him, asking him the same questions as before. This time the boy replied that he was a very poor man who had come from his own country seeking employment, and now he was working as a servant for the grain merchant. The princess went away. For 3 more nights the boy continued to sing in the king's garden, and each night the princess came and asked him the same questions. The boy gave her the same answers as instructed. The princess then approached her father and told him that she wanted to get married but insisted on choosing her husband herself. The king agreed and invited all the kings, rajas, and their sons in the land, explaining that its youngest daughter would meet them and make her choice. Many kings, rajas, and their sons accepted the invitation and gathered in the king's large garden. The next morning, the prince's father instructed them to sit together in the garden while his daughter came to see them and choose her husband. The king admitted that he didn't know whom she would select. The youngest princess decided to choose her own husband and arranged a gathering in the king's garden. She ordered a grand blue painted elephant to be prepared for her. The next morning, she dressed up in a beautiful clothes and jewelry and rode the elephant. Holding a gold necklace in her hand, she circled the garden where the kings, rajas, and their sons were seated. Unexpectedly, she hung the gold necklace around the neck of the boy who worked as a servant for the grain merchant. Everyone laughed and found it astonishing. They thought it was a joke and pushed the boy away. Taking the necklace off his neck, they deemed him dirty and unworthy to be near them. The boy moved far away and watched from a distance to see what would happen. Undeterred, the princess went around the garden again, carrying the gold necklace once more. She placed it around the boy's neck. This could be more laughter and disbelief among the onlookers. They couldn't understand why the princess would choose such a poor and common man as her husband. However, the princess insisted they leave him alone and placed him on her elephant, taking him to the palace. The kings, rajas, and their sons were bewildered by this unexpected turn of events. The king respected his promise to let his daughter choose her husband, declared that she would marry the poor man and she had selected twice. The princess and the boy got married in a grand ceremony, and the king and the queen were satisfied with her choice. The kings, rajas, and their sons returned to their homes. The princess' 6 sisters had married wealthy princes, and they ridiculed her for choosing a poor and ugly husband. They mocked her, saying, "Look, our sister married this poor common man." The 6 husbands of her sisters went hunting every day, bringing home plenty of game for their wives and the king's dinner. However, the youngest princess' husband never went hunting. This saddened her, and she wondered why her husband didn't hunt like her sisters' husbands. One day, the princess asked her husband why he never went hunting like her sisters' husbands. He responded that he would go out that day to enjoy the outdoors or get some fresh air. She suggested take the horse with him, but he insisted on walking instead. He went to the jungle plain where he had left Qatar, who had transformed into a donkey. He confined in Qatar, explaining his situation. The boy had married the youngest princess, and people had mocked their marriage, considering him a poor and common man. Moreover, his wife was sad because of her sister's husbands hunted every day, earning admiration from their wives. But he stayed at home all day and didn't hunt. He expressed his desire to go hunting that day. Qadar instructed him to twist his left ear, and instantly the donkey turned back into a horse. Qadar told the boy to twist his own left ear, and he transformed from a poor, common, ugly man into a handsome young prince with a moon on his forehead and a star on his chin. The prince put on his fancy clothes and prepared Qadar by putting a saddle and bridle on him. He also carried a sword and gun with him. Then the prince climbed onto Qadar's back, and together they set for a hunting expedition. They went out into the wilderness to search for animals to hunt. The beautiful young prince rode a long distance and successfully hunted many birds and deer. On that day, his 6 brothers-in-law, who were also princes, had no luck finding any game because the prince had already shot all of it. They searched throughout the day but couldn't find any animals to hunt. As time passed, they grew hungry and thirsty but couldn't find any water or food. Meanwhile, the prince had found a comfortable spot under a tree to rest and have his meal. To his side, he had refreshing water and delicious roasted meat. When the 6 princes saw the handsome young prince with a moon on his forehead and a star on his chin, they were amazed. They had never seen such a prince in a jungle before and assumed he must be from another country. They approached him. greeted him respectfully, and asked him for food and water as they were hungry and thirsty. The young prince asked them who they were, and they revealed that they were the husbands of the 6 elder daughters of the king of the country. They explained that they had been hunting all day but couldn't find any food or water. However, they did not recognize their brother-in-law at all. The young prince proposed a deal to the 6 princes. He offered to give them food and water if they agreed to follow these instructions. Despite for water to drink, the 6 princes agreed to his terms. The young prince then explained that he would place a red-hot coin on the back of each of them before providing them with food and water. Despite the potential mark it would leave, they agreed because they believed that having water was more important than the mark being hidden by their clothes. The young prince heated 6 coins in the fire, placed one on the back of each prince, and then gave them delicious food and water to satisfy their hunger and thirst. After eating and drinking, they thanked him and showed their gratitude by bowing before returning home. The young prince stayed under the tree till it was evening. Then he mounted his horse and rode off to the king's place. All the people looked at him as he came riding along, saying, "What a splendid young prince that is! He has a moon on his forehead and a star on his chin." But no one recognized him. When he came near the king's palace, all the king's servants asked him who he was. And as none of them knew him, the gatekeepers would not let him pass in. They all wondered who he could be, and all thought him the most beautiful prince that had ever been seen. At last they asked him who he was. "I am the husband of your youngest princess," he answered. "No, no, indeed you are not," they said, "for he is a poor, common-looking and ugly man." "But I am he," answered the prince. No one would believe him. "Tell us the truth," said the servants. "Who are you?" "Perhaps you can't recognize me," said the young prince, "but call the youngest princess here. I wish to speak to her." The servants called her and she came. "That man is not my husband," she said at once. "My husband is not nearly as handsome as that man. This must be a prince from another country." Then she said to him, "Who are you? Why do you say you are my husband?" "Because I am your husband. I am telling you the truth," answered the young prince. "No, you are not. You are not telling me the truth," said the little princess. "My husband is not a handsome man like you. I married a very poor, common-looking man." "That's true," he answered. "But nevertheless I am your husband. I was the grain merchant's servant, and one hot night I went into your father's garden and sang, and you heard me, and came and asked me who I was and where I came from. And I would not answer you. And the same thing happened the next night, and the next night, and on the fourth I was a very poor man, and I had came from my country to seek service in yours, and that I was the grain merchant's servant. Then you told your father you wished to marry but must choose your own husband. And when all the kings and rajas were seated in your father's garden, you sat on an elephant and went around and looked at them all, and then twice hung your gold necklace around my neck. See, here is your necklace, and here are the ring and the handkerchief you gave me on our wedding day." Then she believed him and was very glad that her husband was such a beautiful young prince. "What a strange man you are," she said to him. "Till now you have been poor and ugly and common-looking. Now you are a beautiful and look like a prince. I never saw such a handsome man as you are before, and yet I know you must be my husband." Then she worshipped God and thanked him for letting her have such a husband. "I have," she said, "a beautiful husband. There is no one like him in this country. He has a moon on his forehead and a star on his chin." Then she took him into the palace and showed him to her father and mother and to everyone. They all said they had never seen anyone like him and were all very happy. And the young prince lived as before in the king's palace with his wife, and the Kathar lived in the king's stables. One day, when the king and his 7 son-in-laws were in his courthouse, and it was full of people, the young prince said to him, "There are 6 thieves here in your courthouse." "6 thieves," said the king. "Where are they? Show them to me." "They are here," said the young prince, pointing to his 6 brother-in-law. The king and everyone else in the courthouse were very much astonished and would not believe the young prince. "Take off their coats," he said, and then you will see for yourself that each of them has a mark of a thief on his back. So their coats were taken off, the 6 princes and the king, and everybody in the courthouse saw the mark of the red-hot piece. The 6 princes were very much ashamed, but the young prince was very glad. He had not forgotten how his brother-in-law had laughed at him and mocked him when he seemed a poor common man. Now, when Katha was still in the jungle, before the prince was married, he had told the boy the whole story of his birth and all that had happened to him and his mother. When you are married, he said to him, I will take you back to your father's country. So 2 months after the young prince has revenged himself on his brother-in-law, Katha said to him, it's time for you to return to your father. Get the king to let you go to your own country, and I will tell you what to do when we get there. The prince always did what his horse told him to do. So he went to his wife and said to her, I wish very much to go to my own country to see my father and mother. Very well, said his wife. I will tell my father and mother and ask them to let us go. Then she went to them and told them, and they consented to let her go and her husband leave them. The king gave his daughter and the young prince a great many horses and elephants and all sorts of presents and also a great many sepoys to guard them. In this grand state, they travelled to the prince's country, which was not a great many miles off. When they arrived at the plain, they set up their returns in the same area where the prince had been abandoned in a box by his nurse. This was also the place where Shankar and Suri, the 2 demons, had repeatedly swallowed him in the past. When the king, his father, the gardener's daughter husband, saw the prince's camp, he was very much alarmed and thought a great king had come to make war on him. He sent one of his servants, therefore, to ask whose camp it was. The young prince then wrote him a letter in which he said, You are a great king. Do not fear me. I am not came to make war on you. I am as if I were your son. I am a prince who has came to see your country and to speak with you. I wish to give you a grand feast to which everyone in your country must come. Men and women, old and young, rich and poor, of all castes, all the children, fakirs, sepoys. You must bring them all here to me for a week, and I will fetch them all. The king was delighted with this letter, and ordered all the men, women, and children of all castes, fakirs and sepoys in his country to go to the prince's camp to a grand feast the prince would give them. So they all came, and the king brought his 4 wives too. All came, at least all but the gardener's daughter. No one had told her to go to the feast, for no one had thought of her. When all the people were assembled, the prince saw his mother was not there, and he asked the king, Has everyone in your country came to my feast? Yes, everyone, said the king. Are you sure of that? Asked the prince. Quite sure, answered the king. I am sure one woman has not came, said the prince. She is your gardener's daughter, who was once your wife and is now a servant in your palace. True, said the king. I had forgotten her. Then the prince told his servants to take his finest palanquin and to fetch the gardener's daughter. They were to dress her in a beautiful clothes and handsome jewelries, and then bring her to him in a palanquin. While the servants were bringing the gardener's daughter, the king thought how handsome the young prince was, and he noticed particularly the moon on his forehead and the star on his chin, and he wondered in what country the young prince was born. And now the palanquin arrived, bringing the gardener's daughter, and the young prince went himself to took her out of it, and brought her into the tent. He made her a great many salams. The 4 wicked wives looked on and were very much surprised and very angry. They remembered that when they arrived, the prince had made them no salams, and since then had not taken the least notice of them, whereas he could not do enough for the gardener's daughter, and seemed very glad to see her. When they were all at dinner, the prince again made the gardener's daughter a great many salams and gave her food from all the nicest dishes. She wondered at his kindness to her and thought, Who is this handsome prince with a moon on his forehead and a star on his chin? I never saw anyone so beautiful. What country does he come from? 2 or 3 days were thus passed in feasting, and all the time the king and his people were talking about the prince's beauty and wondering who he was. One day, the prince asked the king if he had any children. None, he answered. Do you know who am I? Asked the prince. No, said the king. Tell me who you are. I am your son, answered the prince, and the gardener's daughter is my mother. The king shook his head sadly. How can you be my son, he said, when I have never had any children? But I am your son, answered the prince. Your 4 wicked queens told you the gardener's daughter had given you a stone and not a son. But it was they who put the stone in my little bed, and then they tried to kill me. The king did not believe him. I wish you were my son, he said, but as I never had a child, you can be my son. Do you remember your dog Shankar? And how you had killed him? And do you remember your cow Suri? And how you had her killed too? Your wives made you kill them because of me. And he said, taking the king to Qatar, do you know whose horse that is? The king looked at Qatar and then said, that is my horse Qatar. Yes, said the prince. Do you not remember how he rushed past you out of his stable with me on his back? Then Qatar told the king, the prince was really his son, and told him all the story of his birth and of his life up to that moment. And when the king found the beautiful prince was indeed his son, he was so glad, so glad. He put his arms round him and kissed him and cried for joy. Now, said the king, you must come with me to my palace and live with me always. No, said the prince, that I can't do. I can't go to your palace. I only come here to fetch my mother, and now that I have found her, I'll take her with me to my father-in-law's palace. I have married a king's daughter, and we live with her father. Now that I have found you, I can't let you go, said his father. You and your wife must come and live with your mother and me in my palace. That we will never do, said the prince. Unless you will kill your 4 wicked queens with your own hand, if you will do that, we will come and live with you. So the king killed his queens, and then he and his wife, the gardener's daughter, and the prince and his wife all went to live in the king's palace and lived there happily together forever and after. And the king thanked God for giving him such a beautiful son and for ridding him from his 4 wicked wives. Katha did not return to the Faris country but stayed always with the young prince and never left him. Thanks for watching. If you like my video, don't forget to subscribe my channel Magic with Words.